It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today's Into the Corner Office CEO guest, George Greene, President and COO at Water Mission, tragically lost his mother, Molly Greene, after the recording of this podcast. We'd like to dedicate this episode to Molly and honor the impact she's made since co-founding Water Mission with her husband, George, back in 2001. Molly has helped to bring clean and safe water to more than 4 million people around the world during the last 20 years. We're so thankful to the Greene family for this opportunity to share just a small part of her story and listen to hear more about what Water Mission's doing under George Greene IV's leadership. My guest today is George Greene. George is President and Chief Operating Officer for Water Mission based in Charleston, South Carolina. Water Mission is a nonprofit Christian engineering ministry providing sustainable, safe water solutions through a Christian worldview perspective to people in developing countries and during national disasters. George has a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Clemson University and started this company when his parents decided to get out of the for-profit world and established Water Mission as a nonprofit. George Greene, welcome into the Corner Office.
Brant, thank you for having me. Looking forward to spending the time with you.
Absolutely. Wonderful to have you here and get a chance to chat a little bit about what the Water Mission does and hear a little bit about what brought you there, because it's really been kind of a lifelong journey. And I'm looking forward to hearing about that. We're both members of the C12 group. And although we didn't meet in Atlanta, I got a chance to see the video of your presentation, and it was just awesome. And I'm really looking forward to talking particularly about some of the company culture things. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. What I'd like to start with is, tell us a little bit about your early years, where you grew up and, what your early family life was like.
Yeah, I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. We moved to Charleston when I was 4 years old, and it was an intentional move by my parents. My dad had a promising career in Exxon research and design, and he and my mother were both trying to be intentional about how they raised their kids, and their the career path that he was on would have had him going all over the world and not having a family that was rooted in any one location. And both my parents are from the South and wanting to raise their kids in the South as well. And so they decided to step out in faith and ended up starting a small environmental laboratory in Charleston and moved our family here. And that was kind of the beginning of our story. So, but
Dad's an engineer, as I recall, and Mom is as well. What's her background?
Actually, no. The comment opposites attract is definitely applicable with my parents. My dad is a PhD chemical engineer, and my mother has a master's in Spanish. So,
oh my God!
It was quite funny. They ended up being quite a dynamic tag team with kind of the technical and engineering side of things, and my mom on the human resources side of things, keeping people from quitting. So
there you go. So they started the company together.
Originally it was my dad, but when what he started with the environmental business, the timing came. It was just God's hand with seeing exponential growth from the very start, and very early on, he told my mother he needed her help and brought her into the business as well.
That's great. Any brothers and sisters, George?
So I have an older sister, and we still are here in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a younger brother, and unfortunately, when he was 2, I was 6 years old. There was a fairly tragic accident with his passing. That was. Very fortunate with my family, very strong in their faith, and I think that you can see a lot of families that can get torn apart when something like that happens. Ours grew closer together, awesome. But that's from being firmly rooted in our faith, and so from the earliest years, I can't remember a time where I wasn't immersed in Christian ministry and in the church. And a lot of that obviously has to do with parents and upbringing.
Yeah. When did you come to Christ, and what role did he play in your upbringing?
Yeah, well, so I was trying to think back on the actual age. I think I was 11 or 12. Yeah. And it's really interesting.
But you grew up in the church, right? You did Sunday school and church.
I did.
Mom and Dad were active.
So I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and having said that, I think, and now looking back and involved in ministry full time, I've gotten to experience pretty much every denomination. and growing up in the Episcopal Church, you definitely are surrounded by liturgy, but I don't ever remember there ever being an altar call. And so interestingly enough, growing up in the Episcopal Church, which now is actually Anglican, we've had a split, where I first kind of connected the dots on inviting Christ to be my Lord and Savior was actually going to a movie that I think was put out by the Billy Graham Evangelical Association, and where it had a kind of a clear presentation and articulation of what salvation meant. And so that was from my memories. Even growing up in the church, you don't necessarily think about that. And it also is very important about understanding the intentionality around asking those questions and making sure that it's clear. So, but that was somewhere around 11, 12 years old.
Nice. And it sounds like Mom and Dad were very inspirational. What were some of the early lessons that you remember getting from them growing up?
Well, so my dad started me with summer jobs starting in the 4th grade. And
in the business,
in the family business. And I don't know if that was intentional and just trying to go ahead and like groom his kids to understand what does it take to run a business, or whether it was just because the business was growing so fast that he needed somebody to keep the bathrooms clean. But yeah, starting out in the 4th grade, I started working every summer. Wow. And my first job was literally cleaning toilets. And so as you think about,
nothing like starting at the bottom.
Well, and when you're that age, you don't really, you don't have to. Things like being humble and things like that, those come naturally for kids. You don't have any kind of delusions of grandeur that you shouldn't be cleaning toilets. But and the other thing too is what's appropriate and what can you do at certain ages. And but so my parents' company, it grew 40% per year. Wow. For I think 15 years, and that means that every 2 years it doubled in size. And ultimately, after 20 years, they were like 350 full-time staff, and they were the largest privately owned laboratory in the United States. And over that 20 years, I spent, almost every summer, starting in the 4th grade, working in some part of that business. And as I grew up and as I got older and could take on different levels of responsibility, I was worked into different areas to learn different parts of it. And I remember the first like major promotion that I got from cleaning toilets was to running a floor buffer which I think that started maybe somewhere around in 6th or 7th grade.
Right.
But then working into ultimately the field crew and going out and drilling wells and installing monitoring wells, and then getting into running instruments and actually running samples on some very expensive and very precise and technical machines, to getting involved in consulting work, and ultimately to the only deviation I had in working in the family business over the summers was one summer, and I don't know if my father and my uncle had some kind of like cruel joke or something going on, but my uncle is a cotton ginner in Alabama, and I got shipped off to Alabama my junior year of high school and spent a half a summer bagging cottonseed on an assembly line type thing. And you want to talk about hard work?
Boy, I can imagine, and hot work as well.
And looking at that, I always knew that I was going to be going to college, but it wasn't until that experience that I knew why. So,
it gave you good appreciation too, right, for hard labor.
Absolutely.
Well, did you have much time for school? God, it sounds like you were pretty busy on the job, right? With Dad from the beginning. Were you a good student, George?
Yeah, I was not a bad student, but I was not the shining example. I got involved in sports, and
what kind of sports? What sports were you playing?
Early on, as a youngster, soccer was a big sport, but my skills kind of peaked in maybe about the 5th grade, and but then I really enjoyed playing football. Started doing that in middle school. And I was at a small private school, and so you were somebody that was 5'10" playing left guard was not uncommon. But I also was I was left guard, the inside linebacker, and the kicker.
Nice. Nice. Well, the kicking comes in handy, obviously, from the soccer, so that makes sense.
You got it. So,
what about other extracurriculars? Music, theater? Was there anything else you got involved with? Debates, public speaking?
That was pretty much it. And that was full time: football in the fall, soccer in the spring, and
working in the summer.
School, and then working in the summer. Yeah. And
what about other inspirational folks? Do you remember any specific teachers or coaches that you had, George, and lessons you might have learned from them?
Oh man, as far as the coaches that I had, I think some of the biggest takeaways from sports were understanding how valuable practice and coaching and understanding that skills would definitely important, and they take you a long way. But seeing that we might have inferior skills, but better coaching and better commitment that allows us to actually be the better team when it was all said and done. That was kind of a real eye opener for me growing up as well. As far as teachers, one of the things, my background is engineering, and I remember a middle school teacher who at the time was not necessarily my favorite teacher. But
we don't need to mention any names, sure.
Yeah, but what she ingrained in me in terms of the importance of writing and communication and being able to write coherently is something that is in you. You see a lack of that in such a big way today, but it's so important, and it's something that people can do, but it really takes a lot of hard work and effort. So, but it's not necessarily probably where you'd think I'd go from a technical background and engineering background. But it's
what about
important.
Entrepreneurial things? Were you involved in much? Did you have much time for that, given your busy, schedule with school and so forth? Did you have the ubiquitous paper route, or, selling lemonade or doing those types of things growing up?
It was between the full-time school and sports, and then immediately into the summers going into the family business. It was more of a focused effort. The only other thing I would say that I also have some really kind of strong and endearing memories was an intentional family devotion that my dad led. We had a program, I think it's called the Daily Walk. And
This is a family program, or this is from the business?
No, this was just an annual calendar devotion that was focused on reading through the entire Bible.
Wow.
And
Cool.
I remember as a family we did that at least twice. And so having some kind of comprehensive knowledge of the Bible and all the amazing stories that are coming out of that. I was that
a daily practice for you then too, or
it was a daily practice. That is correct. And and there are times when it was very exciting, and there were times when you're going through a chronological list of names that you're just like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So, but no, it was, those are definitely some early memories.
That's great. And how old were you when you started your daily devotion?
Oh man,
single digits.
That's a good question. I would say single digits, and that's also another unique thing. I know we're all different, and there's a lot of beauty in that as we come together as the body of Christ. But one of the things that I do not have is a great memory, and I think that there's pros and cons to that. One of the pros is, I think part of that is I don't carry a lot of stress.
Nice.
And I'm able to move past conflict and not have, I don't carry grudges and things like that. But at the same time, that might be just because I can't remember them.
We share that, George. And I don't know if it comes with age or, it's a blessing. Maybe it's a gift from God, because I think as well, it's hard to really carry resentments, right?
If you're
able to let those things go. So
you got it.
I'll consider it a blessing.
Yeah.
So mom and dad obviously sounds like they both got their degrees. Was it kind of a foregone conclusion that you'd also go to college?
Yes. And I don't know that there was ever, and also the school that I went to, a small private school, essentially 100% college attendance. And I do remember early on, we started looking at colleges. My dad, I mentioned my mother and father are both from the South. My mother's from Mississippi and my dad's from Florida. And so growing up in South Carolina, I didn't really have any allegiance to in-state schools.
Right.
And honestly, I was really kind of looking towards the states where my parents were from until we started looking at the logistics of getting to and from those and getting home. And it was at that point when we were doing some like college tours and things like that really kind of honed in that the best option for me was Clemson. And cool. There were two things that were driving that. One was my parents had one, I was basically we kind of had a heart-to-heart with my dad about if you want to come back into the family business, you need to go to school and get a degree in chemical engineering, and then we welcome you back to have a shot at running the family business. And so it was finding a school that offered a solid chemical engineering program. Right. And as I started doing the tours and looking at different schools, and the other thing that was a factor was I was extremely fortunate. My parents set up a college fund. Nice. That would allow me to basically go to any school that I wanted to.
Your sister as well? Did she also go to college?
Yes, sir.
For both of you guys.
Yeah. And so as I was looking at this college fund, and I was looking at tuition, and I was looking at
an easy calculation.
how you compare, and looking at engineering programs and how they're ranked and rated. Clemson was one of the top 20 in the country.
Sure.
But being in state, the tuition was like half or a third, and so I early on asked the question: if I don't spend all this money, what happens to it? And the feedback was that you can maybe put it towards your first home purchase or something. So it became a no-brainer, and I went off to Clemson, and
That's awesome.
And
then did you work for Dad during the summers?
I did not. And so when I got to Clemson and I got into the Chemie program there, it was like somebody throwing a bucket of ice water on me in terms of I don't know that I'd ever worked that hard before. Wow. With school, and when I got into school, one of the things that I plugged into early on was a program called the Cooperative Education Program. And for those that aren't familiar with that, and I'm pretty sure every major university has these, but Clemson had a program where you would interview with businesses and industry that was aligned and looking for people that were going to be coming with degrees that you were studying for. And so I literally went through this program where Clemson would bring in big corporations that were interested in engineering graduates. And I went through interview processes, learned how to put together a resume. They had all this set up for you to do. And I ended up immediately kind of jumping into that. And I was essentially either studying or co-oping for the next 5.5 years.
That's great.
And so to school.
During school as well. So it was a school program as well as a summer program?
Well, no, the way it would work is you'd go to school for a semester and then you would go work for a semester.
Oh, nice.
So the way that would work is you might go to school in the fall and then you'd go work in the spring and you'd come back to school in the summer. And then it would just kind of rotate. And so I co-opted 3 times with a big German chemical company called BASF.
Oh, sure. And, the same one all 3 times?
Yes. And then I had a 4th co-op that was actually with my parents' company at the very end, but after some significant changes had happened. As far as what the family business focus was.
We'll get to that in a few minutes because I know you went through a pretty major change at that stage. Well, that's great. So was the BASF direction something that Dad had encouraged as well? Did he want you to take a look at something outside the family business to get that type of experience? Or was that kind of more self-motivated to determine whether or not you were going to go into the company business?
Honestly, that was certainly something that he was supportive of. But my plugging into the cooperative education program was probably more focused on how I was going to survive the chemical engineering curriculum at Clemson. I embraced the ability to actually get out and have a break and go get hands-on and sought that out and saw that as and the other thing too is it was also promoted that you go through this things like your starting salary increased by 15%. So there are a lot of pros to it as well, but it does prolong your time while you're in school. But I would highly recommend it, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
That's fantastic. Did you have any leadership or management responsibilities during those co-ops? In other words, were you developing people and responsible for that, or was it more of a rotational type of an assignment? This
was. This experience, pretty much the reason I chose BASF was because they were one of the top tier organizations that was offering when I was looking. And but the role that I was in, I think, was actually really unique in terms of what people would plug into, because I was actually in a sales role, and I was placed remotely in Jacksonville, Florida, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And there were no other BASF employees in Jacksonville. And so it was really quite a bit of, and essentially what I was doing, I was in the paper and fiber division of chemical sales. Yeah. And I was calling on kind of a cluster of mills that were in that area looking to promote and support BASF products, and supporting a sales rep that they had I didn't have responsibility for that region. I was supporting somebody else. But it was a real eye opener in terms of just being completely independent and having very limited supervision. And also, when you cold call walking into a place, the power that bringing a box of donuts has, and just being able, and how do you get to know people? And because people don't like change, and a lot of times you're coming in with a new product. Those are not necessarily welcome conversations. So it was a great experience from a technical experience and also from a people experience, but maybe a little bit unique in terms of I wasn't in an office or at a plant and closely working with other employees in the same category.
Do you remember the first time you started managing people, George?
Yeah. So that actually is transitioning into the role that I'm currently in.
Got it. All right. Well, so let's back up a bit. I want to hear a little bit about that because Mom and Dad kind of had a little bit of a surprise for you when you graduated from college, from what I understand.
Yeah. So so I started college in 1995, and when you're doing the cooperative education program, your time gets extended. And
you're extending it, right? So it's close to 2000 by the time you got
right.
out.
And but to back up before 2000. In the fall of 1998, there was a big hurricane called Hurricane Mitch that hit Honduras. And our family had a missionary that we had been supporting in Honduras for a long, long time. And this missionary, prior to being a missionary in Honduras, was actually my former Sunday school teacher. And so it's just some really kind of neat connections. And so when the hurricane hit, there were some really close kind of connections that we had, where my dad speaks to really feeling God put a burden on his heart that needed to do something about it. And that ultimately transitioned into a relief effort to go help with drinking water in Honduras in response to Hurricane Mitch. And this was in the fall of 1998. Right. And I was very much aware of that relief effort. I was in Clemson at the time when that was happening. But I coming out of that relief effort, the impact that it had on my parents was pretty profound, to where they felt that God was calling them into a different direction. And ultimately, they felt that God was calling them to sell the business that they had built and start a Christian ministry that was focused on water and sanitation needs in the developing world, and also in disaster relief. And I remember my birthday in October, I think it was in the year 2000, that my parents came up to school, and we sat down and had just a conversation around what my thoughts were on that. And it was the first time that they had kind of told me where they had felt that that God was leading and calling them, but at the same time, they'd also, they knew that I was coming out of college to come back into the family business, and how did I feel about that? And,
was that a big shock for you?
Looking back on it, it seems like it might have been a bigger one, or it should have been a bigger one, but honestly, it almost felt more like I don't know if I'd say a relief, but and not necessarily from a pressure standpoint, but more from maybe just the excitement of the new opportunity. Because in that, as that conversation progressed, the comment was that, would you have an interest in joining us as we continue down this path? Yeah. And that was so I had as I spent the rest of wrapping up my degree, really seeking God's will and guidance for where is He wanting me in my life, and really feeling that I was being called and led into that as well. And I had several offers on the table to go into the corporate world. One with BASF, but when it was all said and done, I felt that God was leading me this direction. And coming straight out of school, I ended up joining Water Mission, and my parents,
Mom and Dad had sold the business, right? By the time you graduated,
they had sold the business, and they started Water Mission officially as a Christian ministry, as a nonprofit organization, and so that officially happened in July of 2001, I believe. And my parents actually started as volunteers, and so they today still are full-time volunteers. They used proceeds from the sale of their business to help start Water Mission, and still are considered major donors to the ministry today.
So you were employee number one.
I was one of two employees that started on day one.
And how many employees today?
Today, we're pushing probably about 500.
Wow. That's fabulous. And that was about 15, 16, 18 years ago, I guess, huh?
Going on, 18, 19 years. Yeah. So your question about when did I start managing people was actually
day one there.
well, no, we didn't. So I didn't have any direct reports or anything like that. But what was interesting was in the early days, all of our experience, as far as our family business experience, was coming from the for-profit world, and getting into a nonprofit and how nonprofits run, and how do you raise support, and how do you? I mean, we had no idea what we were doing.
Steep learning curve.
Well, and even like I remember, I was at church one Sunday, and I was talking to somebody at church that was retired that said, it's really cool what you guys are doing. If you ever have any needs, I'd be happy to come out and help volunteer. And it had never even dawned on me that maybe we should be recruiting volunteers.
Right.
and so some of the early on, my management was with volunteers and guiding volunteers, which in and of itself can be a very delicate thing.
Yes, a very important lesson too, because if you can't motivate people and not paying them, you're probably going to have a hard time doing it any other way too.
Yes, but and also a very unique workforce, because you might have them doing very basic tasks, like sweeping the floor or emptying trash cans, when they're retired urologists or attorneys or something like that, and they might have coming from a professional background. So and then it's interesting too. So Water Mission, in the early days, we had kind of a struggle for understanding what we were really being called to do and how we should exist as an organization. And when we first got started, we really thought what we were going to be able to bring in terms of value was a real heavy technical focus, with the idea of designing and implementing products in areas where we would see projects that would fail because maybe they weren't designed appropriately, or maybe it wasn't high quality equipment, or it wasn't the right product for the application. But what we quickly found out and realized was that just products alone are not the only need, and there have to be comprehensive programs and plans put in around how things are going to be run and maintained. And so there was this just huge learning curve in the early days about how much further in depth we really need to be thinking and building out systems and processes for being able to be successful. And even also with that, how do we raise support? I remember in the early days as a Christian ministry, we had an amazing opportunity with one of these tech companies in the early 2000s. You had a huge boom in internet kind of services and things like that. And one of the tech companies that is still a big brand name today, we had some really amazing conversations that were going on around support of the work that we do. And they were super excited. The president of their company had come out and spent time with us. And I remember we were thinking, how in the world are we having a conversation with this group? We're nobody. But it was happening. And they went back to California and said, we need to sit down with our board and talk about this, and then we'll get back to you. And they did that, and they came back, and the conversation that happened was, you guys, you've got a really great thing that's going on, and we're excited and we want to partner with you. But just to be very direct, you need to separate the water component of what you do from Christian ministry.
Oh, wow.
And what had happened was, on their board, they had people from different faiths and different backgrounds that did not embrace the Christian ministry component of who we are. And the feedback was, if we're going to partner with somebody, they can't be a Christian ministry.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting thing for us from timing wise, we were really struggling, and I didn't necessarily know the full picture, but we were close to having to shut our doors as a ministry and as an organization when this came back, and it was a real test around looking back on
commitment.
it, right? And coming out of that test, what we did was we went the opposite direction. We doubled down on who we are as a Christian ministry. We actually implemented a daily devotion for all staff that starts at the beginning of the day with the idea that we're going to really make sure we regroup and ground everybody in purpose for why we're here, which is as a Christian ministry, and that the way that we're going to make sure we stay focused on that is we're going to start every day in doing that. So we spend.
How did the tech company take the thanks but no thanks message?
It wasn't. I mean, it was well, we understand, but we can't partner with you. And the amazing thing that came out of that was right after that happened. This was 2003 time period. We got a government grant that just kind of came out of the blue. That was the biggest grant we'd had. It actually allowed us to bring in inventory to pre-position for some projects that we were going to do in Honduras. And after we had all this inventory in our warehouse, the Southeast Asia tsunami hit. And
back
we
in
were
2006.
Well, that was actually 2004.
Right,
December.
That's right.
And we had kind of been building credibility during this time. And when the tsunami hit, we had all kinds of groups reaching out to us asking for support, and we had resources just pour in to be able to meet that need. And we had, because of this other grant that we had all this equipment that was sitting in our warehouse, and we had the ability to respond immediately. Awesome. And it was just kind of, as you look back and you see God's fingerprints on your story. And kind of where you see what you think your plans are, and then what ultimately what God's plans are, and what He has in store.
We touched a little bit. Yeah, it's awesome. We touched a little bit early on about the cultural shift your company went through, and I'd mentioned that I just this last week listened to your video, or rather heard a video of your presentation at the C12 National Conference, which took place a month or so back in Atlanta, and I was so impressed by the kind of cultural analysis that you did and kind of the cultural shift that went through. Give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of that, because it sounded like it was a pretty difficult process, but one in which you've come out with, again, an even bolder culture and a stronger commitment to your faith.
Yeah. So, as you grow as an organization, you and you start from nothing. Over time, and you'd already asked, we started out with 2 full-time employees and 2 full-time volunteers, and today we're 500 full-time staff globally, and we've probably got somewhere around 400 active volunteers on an annual basis. That's as well.
Incredible.
As you grow up and as an organization, you have to start putting systems and processes in place and things like that. And also, I think last year we had 60% growth. The year before that, we had 40%. In the prior 5 years, we averaged 20% growth. And it was somewhere in those prior 5 years, where 20% growth, that's pretty significant.
It's doubling in 5 years. Yeah,
we were just kind of piecing things together, and we hadn't had a really intentional focus on how the organization was being built from the ground up, with things like performance reviews and getting the right processes and procedures in place, from anything from like procurement to standards for engineering projects and things like that. Just because you're figuring this out as you go, so in my C12 talk, I remember after we had gotten into this journey a little bit, there was a great video and talk by a fellow named Henry Cloud that emphasizes kind of that there are three kind of character traits for Christians from a biblical perspective that you're going to find, and the Bible doesn't beat around the bush with this. It basically says people fall into the category of being either wise, fools, or evil. And so when you and Dr. Cloud's message is a really great kind of unpacking of that, but it ultimately, as you think about those three categories, if you're not intentional about building out a healthy culture within your organization, that you're gonna accumulate people in all three of those categories over time. And the people in that last category as evil are people that are intentionally trying to inflict pain,
right? Prepare to do damage. Yeah.
And it's just, it's kind of crazy to think about that, but it's reality. And so the other thing that I thought was kind of helpful in terms of how you think about this is, if you think about those three categories, wise, fools, and evil, and if you have a team of 10 people and the job for those 10 people is to row a boat, that the breakout where you have people falling in all those categories, and this was Water Mission's breakout, was that you might have 6 people that are actually trying to row the boat in unison. You've got 3 people that are actively trying to sink the boat, right? And then you've got 2 people that are just looking for a place where nobody will notice that they're sleeping. And so you think about this, it's just such a wake up call on how important it is to be intentional about building out the culture that you want, as opposed to letting it just happen on its own. And so we went down this path, and the first thing that we did was we needed a benchmark for what the overall health was of the ministry, and we went to a place called Best Christian Workplaces that offers an anonymous survey that goes out to your employees, and in that it measures the overall health and status of your organization, looking at kind of 8 different key areas within the ministry, and providing you specific feedback on anything from teamwork to talent to compensation to communication and other areas as well. And then we were extremely fortunate to form a relationship with a foundation called LifeShape. And LifeShape is one of the Cathy family foundations, and that's the Chick-fil-A family Cathy. That LifeShape takes kind of Chick-fil-A's business training and leadership development principles and looks to make those available to other Christian ministries, and they do work with for-profit companies as well. But they have really come alongside us in the last 2 years and kind of held our hand with getting a lot of things in place that are necessary for really making sure that we build a healthy culture, and that we're growing leaders, and that we're investing in our staff in a way that allows us to see Water Mission thrive as a ministry, which ultimately facilitates the accomplishment of our mission and vision in the best way possible.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the results you've seen from that cultural transformation and the investments you've made there?
Yeah, so it's all over the place in terms of kind of how it's played out. But some of the things that it forced us to do, one of the big things was we had an intentional focus on what are our values. And when we started the process, we had 8 values. And there probably wasn't a single person in the organization that could easily list them all. And so we looked at our values, and we consolidated them into something that was manageable and something that everybody could understand and embrace. And our focus today with our values is that they're of love, excellence, and integrity. And it's something, those are some, and we can unpack those in very in-depth and intentional ways, but it's also something that just resonates for kind of who we are as a Christian ministry. That's an engineering ministry. When we talk about those three words, they set in with all those. We also, as an organization, had real problems articulating and setting tangible goals. And the reason for that is because we do disaster relief. We also one of the biggest, and so with disaster relief, we set out on an annual basis and we develop an operating plan for that year. And that operating plan, you can't predict disasters. And so while we set out with all these plans that we're going to focus on when something like the 2010 Haiti earthquake happens,
right.
And within a month and a half, we sent 150 water treatment systems, each system that could provide water for up to 5,000 people into Haiti to respond to that disaster. We had other things that we were planning on doing if that disaster hadn't happened. And so, so as we think about, how do you respond to these things?
Agile,
how do you build? Yeah. And then the other thing that's been a huge, maybe kind of forcing us to live in faith constantly, it feels like, is that with all those numbers that I gave you on growth and where we've grown over the years, the other interesting, if you were to look at our income, we forecast our income as a part of the operating plan. At the end of the year, 40% or more of our income that comes in is coming from sources that weren't what we forecasted.
That's great.
Well, no, I don't know about that, because
it can be, right, if it's unfound.
that brings up the question. Well, what are your forecasting processes, and how realistic are they? But then at the same time, God's continuing to open doors,
provide for you in other ways you couldn't have expected.
But they're also maybe going into a different direction, and so so tying in and bringing in goal setting. We've also seen some employee engagement things where we actually have a staff-owned culture committee that focuses on how to breathe life into the organization in a healthy way. And so, like, some of the things that we have are we actually have health-related challenges where we're encouraging people to set stretch goals and exercise and things like that. And also when we think about people's health, one of the categories is spiritual health. And so even having like a stretch goal for, what does your devotion life look like? All of our staff are professing believers and have expressed a sense of calling to the work that Water Mission does. And so, which, when you look back at that, the Christian ministries experience conflict, and even maybe more so, because we're a Christian ministry, and because we can, we have to be very much aware of the potential for spiritual warfare.
Yeah. Well, George, you've been very generous with your time, but I do have a couple more questions I want to ask before we wrap up, because you've been, hitting on the people, and it's really terrific that you've got, that commitment to the faith that you have among all your staff. What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest and hire?
Yeah. Over the years, we have developed a very intentional recruiting program. And a lot of that starts with that we have an application process that anyone that's interested in can just go and look at on our website. But some of the first things that we start out with are making sure that people have read our statement of faith and who we are as a ministry, and then making sure that they agree with that. And I say intentional over the years because I can't tell you how many people have checked that they agree with our statement of faith as a part of the application process, and they don't have any idea what they just read. and so really kind of building that out, and some of the questions that we have around people, speaking to what does this mean from how they walk out their faith in their lives.
Right.
And
kind of ask the question a couple of different ways, right? So
and
make sure they know what you're talking
that's
about.
done in an initial screening process, but then it's also, of course, done in person as well, because it's not just about job skills. This is definitely a calling, and it's a ministry, and we're looking for 100% alignment from a faith perspective to be able to be a candidate. And then there's also a huge focus on culture fit. And so as you think about culture fit, thinking about somebody that has a growth mindset. When you think about a disaster relief organization, well, we have a lot of stuff that changes pretty rapidly around here. Right. And as a part of kind of screening candidates, there's an evaluation in things like a DISC profile and things like that, that's looking at, how well do you embrace change? Because if, if
you're rigid, don't apply here.
And not only embrace change, but thrive in it. When you talk about 40% growth, 60% growth, is that something that motivates you, or is that something that makes you want to go crawl into a hole? Right. And it's not to say that one's right or wrong, but it is for right or wrong, or whether you're a fit to work at Water Mission or not. So
great. Last question, George. What career and life advice would you give to someone who's, got their eyes on getting into the C-suite or the corner office, or like you, being involved in starting a nonprofit and rising to the top of that organization?
Yeah, that's would you go back and do it again?
Some days you do and some days you don't, I'm sure, like anything.
The journey that I've been fortunate to be on has been an amazing experience. With some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows, and it certainly has been worth it. How to guide somebody. I think, the one thing that when we first got started, we always got a lot of, when you're new in the area and on the playground, that you don't know what you're talking about and you don't know what you're doing. And I think the best advice for somebody that's looking at a startup or something like that is, accept that that there are definitely component pieces to that are probably true. But don't let that dissuade you from pursuing what you feel God's calling you to go and do. As far as leadership goes, I think it's different for everybody, and I think you got to be really thick-skinned. And so maybe that first comment I made about having a bad memory, you can't let stuff hold you down or pull you down. You got to be able to bounce back, and you got to be able to take tough news and deal with it, and still be able to be a promoter and encourage, even though it might not feel like it at times. But and then the other thing, I think, understand there's no job too small. I'll still go and clean a toilet every now and then.
Take us full circle.
and part of that is if you're going to ultimately, if we're going to be serving people with water projects, for the ministry to run, the trash cans have to be emptied, the toilets have to be clean, and somebody's got to do that. And so, a reminder of what it takes to actually do some of those things. And, I'll take out the trash, I'll clean dishes in the kitchen. Part of it is I find it a little therapeutic.
There you go.
But no job's too small, and just be open to being able to, and being open to doing whatever's needed. So.
Well, George Greene, President and CEO for the Water Mission based in Charleston, South Carolina, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. I hope this is helpful for some folks, and any additional questions or feedback, people can check out our website and feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.